Welcome to the G5 Hive and our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into the G5 college football landscape with the folks that know the team's the best. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review. Today we'll be heading over to the Mid-American Conference for some MACtion and taking a look at the Buffalo Bulls, who finished 9-4 last season and capped off their season with a win in the Bahamas Bowl. They wrapped up their 2025 spring practice with their spring game on April 19th. We have a special guest joining us today. She is a Pittsburgher from Annapolis in Buffalo. She is the college and high school sports enterprise reporter for the Buffalo News, and every once in a while she may run a 5K. She is Rachel Lenzi. Rachel can be found on X at Rachel M. Lenzi. Welcome to the show, Rachel.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for coming back for a second year. And for those who maybe missed last year and just tuning into the G5 Hive for the first time, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how long you've been covering Buffalo football?
Yeah, I just finished up my 7th year covering college sports for the Buffalo News, including the University of Buffalo football and basketball teams. We also cover Niagara, St. Bonaventure, and Canisius athletics, and I help out with high schools and, covered college sports since 2009 and getting ready for another football season.
Well, for those not familiar with Buffalo's offensive style, how would you describe it?
It's in the last season because under new coach Pete Lembo, they had a quarterback who seemingly, I don't know if came out of nowhere is the right word. CJ Agbana was, a starter at Southeast Missouri, lost his starting job, then came in as a transfer, was behind Cole Snyder in 2023. Came out as a starter, really managed the offense well in 2024, and got UB to 9 wins. Also, they had a breakout running back in Aljay Henderson, but he emerged from a group that was really running back by committee as well, too, and he still finished with more than 1,000 yards this season. Wide receivers, there was a mix of experience and youth, but UB returns Victor Snow, who was their leading receiver last year. They've got to rebuild a little bit at tight end after the loss of Jake Orlando, and they also moved Andrew Schnackenberg to long snapper during spring because there is just such a deficit in special teams right now. Basically, they're going to be turning to the transfer portal to incoming recruits to fill spots at long snapper, at punter, at kicker as well, too. So, kind of the big question marks are going to be offensive line. UB, loses 2 starters on the offensive line as well, too. But, one of the things they try to do is really go pass first and let the running back group come out of that. And the running backs, it's very much situational as well, too. While Aljay Henderson thrived, with the 1,000-yard rushing season. They also have guys like Messiah Birch, like, excuse me, I'm totally blanking on his name right now, Lamar Sperling, who were very good situational backs and come up with big plays in timely plays.
Well, you talked about that quarterback room. Well, let's get there, and that's where it all starts on offense. Last season when we spoke, we really had no idea who the quarterback would be, kind of like you mentioned. And CJ Agbana, he had a heck of a season with 2,815 total yards, 27 total touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Heading into 2025, the Bulls return Gunnar Gray, and the staff also brought in Taquan Roberson from Kansas State. This year, we'll have the same question as we had last year heading into the season. Who will be the Bulls' Week 1 starter against Minnesota?
That's a good question. Right now, given on the basis of experience alone, It looks like it's going to be Taquan Roberson, but as Pete Lembo has said, everything's a competition right now. But Taquan Roberson comes in. He started in 2023 at UConn because their previous starter had gotten injured in the first game of the season, and he really took that position and took the ball, for lack of a better word, and ran with it and passed with it as well. He's in his 7th year of college football. It's one of these situations where he didn't play at one school. He had a COVID year. He didn't play another school. He was a backup last season at Kansas State, but he comes in not just with, into his 7th year. He's got a master's degree. He has seen a lot of different offenses and a lot of different defenses as well at Penn State, at UConn, at Kansas State, and now he's at UB. And he's the one on paper who's got the leg up in this quarterback.
Well,
competition.
For those not familiar with Roberson's game, how would you describe it?
He is very quick. He's a very good decision maker. He's very good at evaluating opposing defenses as well and using people around him. The spring game was the first time we really saw much of Taquan Roberson, much of Gunnar Gray, much of Jack Shields, who transferred. And the offense didn't look fluid even in a controlled setting, but there are a lot of new parts in there as well. Working with a kind of a retinker at offensive line. LJ Henderson did not play in the spring game due to a lingering knee injury as well, too. So it gave a couple of the younger players like Terrence Shelton Jr. And James McNeil Jr. They got some necessary reps as well and kind of said, hey, here's, take our body of work into consideration when you're looking at the depth chart as well, too. But again, the spring game was very controlled. We didn't get to see a lot of the players. It was also very wet and windy, so they had to work through those conditions as well, too. So a little more conducive to the run game as well, too.
Well, you said that, this is still maybe a competition here. So those who are not familiar with Gray's game, how would you describe that?
We don't have a big sample size on Gunnar Gray. He's only gotten a few reps. He comes from a junior college in San Diego as well, too, where he put up big numbers, but he's never really had the opportunity to show himself in game. I mean, he's also an unproven entity in this offense.
Well, moving over to the running game, boy, did LJ Henderson burst onto the scene in that Toledo game. He ran for 142 yards in the game, and it seemed like it was his backfield from that point on. Henderson returns along with several others. You mentioned that he was injured in the spring. I assume he's going to be good to go come
yeah.
fall.
Oh, yeah. We'd asked Pete about it afterwards, and he said basically he had tweaked his knee during spring practices. He wasn't feeling great the day of the game, so that's why he decided to opt out. In fact, I saw him on campus a couple of weeks ago, and he looked good. He said hello to me, and I was like, "Hey, how's it going?" He's doing okay. But the thing about the running backs, they have a new coach. Ray Pickering left in January to take the same job as running backs coach at Oregon State. They brought in Jordan Johnson, a former UB football player, a former Buffalo standout, sweet home graduate. He was coaching at Penn and coached the Ivy League Player of the Year, who later transferred to Georgia Tech after the 2023 season. And I don't think he's changing too much philosophically about what they're doing. Again, Jordan Johnson knows he's got so many different types of players in that room. From LJ Henderson, who really became the top dog last year, to Messiah Burge, who, he can pass, he can catch. He can throw, he can run, he can catch, excuse me. Lamar Sperling, great situational back. James McNeil, who's another local guy from Bishop Timon in Buffalo, very, very athletic as well. Young guy, Terrence Shelton, same thing. Big, tall back, very athletic. And Mark Anthony Scott as well, another one, very good situational back. So there's a lot of depth there, and there's a lot of there to choose from. So one of the things that Jordan Johnson has in his advantage, he can figure out how to use each of these guys each way, whether it's by committee or say, oh, you're going to go into certain roles. We've got a bell cow. Here's who else we can utilize when, maybe LJ Henderson needs a couple plays off.
I guess, how do you see the Bulls starting the season? Because last season they kind of came up with that committee approach, and then, like I mentioned, that game happened, and then it was LJ Henderson going forward. Do you think they start with that workhorse role and then move to committee, or do they start with the committee approach and move to a workhorse?
Well, they opened against Minnesota, and I don't know if, even though it is, Minnesota, I don't think, trying and testing different combinations or different backs or different positional players It's a great strategy. I think you want to have a game plan in place to compete with Minnesota at that point. You're going to find out exactly what your team is about against Minnesota. I mean, the same thing happened against Missouri at Missouri last year. They got humbled, lost Nick McMillan, their wide receiver, to a season-ending knee injury as well, too. And they said, well, we got a better idea of what we need to work on. We're not going to have someone that's, we're not going to face another opponent that's up to snuff with Missouri. They're probably not going to face another opponent that's up to snuff with Minnesota, but they're going to get a good idea early of the blueprint that they need to run and build off that first game.
Well, let's move over to the wide receiver room. The Bulls were hit hard by graduation after the 2024 season, and 2025 is much of the same. The Bulls graduate 3 wideouts. Got J.J. Jenkins, Tajay Johnson, and Tad Barr. Javion Cuff hit the portal. He's off to Texas, Rio Grande Valley. The duo of Jenkins and Johnson accounted for 95 targets, 779 yards, and 6 touchdowns. It would seem this room will lean on Victor Snow heavily here in 2025. And he was kind of a feel-good story a season ago that he was not on scholarship but earned one during the season. He led the Bulls in targets with 77, receptions with 55, yards with 649, and touchdowns with 6. You mentioned Nick McMillan getting hurt there. We hope to see him healthy here in 2025. While this room didn't bring in any transfer, it doesn't have a lot of game experience in the room. What are the expectations for this room heading into the season?
Again, Victor Snow is going to be the leader in that group. Nick McMillan has to stay healthy at that point. And they're going to need a lot of guys to step up quick, learn on the job, and produce quickly. I mean, you can't have a functioning quarterback without functioning wide receivers. So the learning curve is going to have to be very, very quick for the team. Now, Victor Snow looked very comfortable in the spring game as well, too. He's got a lot more confidence coming back. Nick McMillan didn't play in the spring game as well. He dressed but did not play. But, he needs to come back healthy and be ready to contribute as well, too. So that whole group, they're going to look a lot at Victor Snow and Nick McMillan, and even Qua Sanders, who, hasn't had the big numbers, but he's got a lot of experience under his belt, and he's going to really have to, those 3 are really going to have to lead the way for that group.
What can you tell us about Nick McMillan's injury from last season and how he's progressing?
He had a season-ending knee injury, had to have surgery on it. In his return, took things very, very slow. I'd see him working out on the side at practices as well, too. Working out with physical therapists, with trainers, and the key is to get him back to full speed. I mean, he was expected to be their top receiver or one of their top receivers this, in 2024. And they expect that again of him in 2025.
So given that Snow and Jenkins accounted for 65% of the Bulls' wide receiving receptions in 2024, are we looking at a Snow McMillan show here in 2025?
We could, provide it if he stays healthy.
Well, I got to ask at this point, if you had to pick an offensive player to have a breakout type season here in 2025, who would you pick?
Taquan Roberson, definitely. He has to. There has to be no hesitation from him. The quarterback is the point person as well, too. It took CJ Agbana a few games to find that groove. It wasn't until probably the Toledo game that things all came together. They had just come off of just a demoralizing loss at UConn. And after that game, CJ Agbana just sat down with the offensive coordinator, Dave Patno, and said, what do I need to go over? What do we need to fix? How do we need to get things right from here? And that was part of a tough stretch, that loss to UConn. They beat Toledo. It was an upset. And then they lost to Western Michigan on a highly disputed play, and then lost to Ohio the following week as well, too. So there's a lot of learning in those 3 or 4 weeks. But Agbana and Sean Dolak team together, and they really led this team to a very strong finish, and they really capitalized on their schedule as well. But Taquan Roberson has got to take that same role. He's got to be the guy who commands the field, can self-diagnose and self-correct, and he's got to lead this team, and there can't be a hesitation in that.
For those not familiar with the Bulls' defensive scheme, how would you describe it?
Everything runs through the linebackers. I don't think that's going to change, even though Sean Dolak is Now in the NFL with the LA Rams, Red Murdoch returns as well. UB's also brought in 2 linebackers as transfers. Mitchell Gonser from Harvard, who was an Ivy League player. Connor Henderson, who was from Cornell, but was at North Texas last year and did not play last year because of an ankle injury. But I think Connor Henderson's going to take a very similar role to what Sean Dolak's going to take. No, nobody can be Sean Dolak. You cannot replace a Sean Dolak, but you can really bring in players who fit in that scheme and who set the tone the way Sean does. The question mark for the defense is going to be the secondary. Again, they lose Marcus Fuqua, return a lot of players, but the secondary really took its hits last year as well. I mean, we had Marquise Cooper, who came up with a 100-yard interception return. That was great for SportsCenter, but their pass defense was not up to par. So that's an area where they're really, really going to have to focus on tightening up. I think the defensive line is going to look very strong. They were very lucky in getting Kobe Stewart back. He withdrew from the transfer portal. They've got George Wallow coming back for another year. It seems like he's been here for 6-7 years at this point, probably. He'll come back at defensive tackle after a left biceps injury surgery. He had that, I think, end of September of last year as well, too. They've got to build some depth on edge as well, too. But I think the front seven, for the most part, are going to be strong. It's going to be the secondary that's really got to improve quickly and get things together for this season.
Well, overall, this defense has a lot of returning production. So let's dig into these strong position room and start with those guys up front on that defensive line, like you were talking about. This room graduated 3 guys from a season ago. You got Dyshawn Folsom, CJ Basil, Antonio Cokley. Now, while Deion Crawford is a linebacker on the roster, he lines up at the edge a lot. So I thought I would be fitting to mention him here. Buffalo returns a dynamic duo off the edge with Deion Crawford and Kobe Stewart. They will keep opposing quarterbacks up at night. They accounted for 72 pressures and 18 sacks a season ago. The interior also looks stout with the return of Cornell Evans and Tristan Souza. What are the expectations for this defensive front in 2025?
They are going to capitalize on their experience. So one of the other areas where they don't have a lot of experience is at edge. They've got Kobe Stewart, Malin White. Again, like you said, Deion Crawford can play at the edge. There are numbers there, but there is not experience. So someone's gonna have to, someone in that group is gonna have to get on the job training to learn how to play at edge. I think the interior is gonna be very strong. George Wallow, Tristan Souza, you mentioned as well. They bring in a lot of experience. Junior Poyser is another guy also. They bring in a lot of experience here. The defensive front, the front four they're not gonna have to be worried about. It's gonna be the depth on edge they have to worry about.
Well, who in this room do you feel is ready to make that jump here in 2025?
Of the front four?
Yeah.
That's a good question as well. I think Tristan Souza. I think if he gets some more playing time, he earns more playing time as well. He's he has a chance to really contribute. Another guy who I kind of see, this is kind of my wild card here as well, is Jakari Bennett. He's another one he can capitalize on those opportunities, not playing time, because they need to build that depth behind Malin White and Kobe Stewart.
Well, the Smash Brothers are no more. Sean Dolak and Red Murdoch were both first-team all-conference linebackers. These guys combined for 219 tackles, 8 sacks, and 6 interceptions. Red Murdoch returns, but Dolak, like you mentioned, is off to the NFL and with the Rams. Rachel, we got to address the elephant in the room, or maybe the bull in the room. How did Sean Dolak not only not win the Butkus Award, but he wasn't even one of the 6 finalists?
He didn't go to the combine either, and he wasn't drafted. There was a lot stacked against it. Some people will say, there is a G5 bias. My argument also is that, and this is, kind of that, I don't think UB did enough to help promote him either. I think that's also their job. You can only write so much about a great person, if you're coming from the Buffalo News. There wasn't a lot of attention. I mean, I can't tell you also, and I asked UB, I said, was there any kind of promotional tour, any kind of social media campaign? I laugh and I say, I get notebooks from Iowa every year about their top basketball and football players. I think somewhere I have a Caitlin Clark pamphlet in my house, but I think there was a little both sides. I think he was either overlooked by the voters, by the scouts, by the public. I mean, not a lot of people are paying attention to G5 football. Let's be honest. It's not the Alabamas and Michigans of the world. Again, I think some of those wounds were a little self-inflicted by the institution as well, too. Sean Dolak did everything he could, but in the end, also he signed as an undrafted free agent with the Los Angeles Rams. And I also tell guys, and I've covered colleges for a long time, even if you aren't drafted, if there are teams calling you as an undrafted free agent, sometimes it's better because you can pick what situation is best for you as well, too. And he's a guy who made the most of this, even though he didn't take the traditional path to getting an NFL opportunity.
Yeah, to your point, yeah. Sometimes when it gets to that 7th round, there's I got drafted, but then I'm stuck here in this situation or whatever it is, as opposed to, that freedom to get to pick what solution or which area you go to. So now that we got that out of the way, how did this current linebacking group look in the spring?
I thought, obviously Red Murdoch, was up. He was up to the test. I think Connor Henderson's going to be one of the guys who really takes the reins on this defense. Again, he sat out last season at Texas. He was another one of the top Ivy League performers 2 years ago. But he's really ready to take on the challenge. He's ready to play again. And again, I don't think anybody can replace Sean Dolak, but I think, if you can come in that linebacking position and, really take your chances. And if you work with Joe Bowen, another guy who, really helped level up this defense, and especially the linebackers in particular, you've got a fighting chance there. And I really think Connor Henderson's going to be a guy who has a breakout year on defense.
So you mentioned Sean Dolak getting with CJ Bogna, figuring out what to do. That's leadership. Is it safe to say, given that this defense leans on the linebackers, that Red Murdoch assumes that leadership role?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I mean, he has the respect of that entire team. He's got the respect of the conference as well. He's got his own self-confidence. And he's a super bright guy. He's a guy who always wants to learn things. He always wants to get to know people as well, too. And he's another guy who, he can communicate and connect with just about every player on that team. So I definitely think you're going to see Red Murdoch step into that role.
Well, this defensive secondary could be one of the strongest rooms in Buffalo. I know you won't want it to click pretty quick, but starter Marcus Fuqua and a couple others who saw some snaps in 2024. Sylvester Hines and Caleb Tate have all graduated. The staff also has added cornerbacks Keontae Bradley from Arizona State and safety Miles Greer from Shepherd. Given how deep the positional room was before those additions, what should we expect from the secondary unit in 2025?
They've got to improve. They have to improve. When you're towards the bottom of the statistical standings on pass defense, they've got to pull up. And I mean the MAC it's such a pass oriented league. I mean, you can't afford to make mistakes. This secondary has to be focused on overall improvement this year.
Did anyone stand out to you in the spring?
You know what? Marquise Cooper, I saw a lot of growth in his game as well, too. And we didn't see a lot of Keontae Bradley, but he's another one who's going to have a lot of expectations around him. A former, I believe he was a 3 or 4-star recruit of Ohio, went to Arizona State. Things didn't pan out there. And he joined the team as a transfer. So, if he can earn playing time, he's got a chance to prove himself right away at this level.
Now, if you had to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season in 2025, who would that be?
Marquise Cooper. I think we've got to see some more consistency from him as well. He had that 100-yard interception return for a touchdown earlier in the season. If he can bring the pieces together as well, and they're all there. I expect to see him really take the role as a leader and as a productive player, particularly in the secondary.
All right, we got to talk about special teams. Is that unit looking, and are there any concerns?
There are a lot of concerns on special teams. They're Upton Belenfant, their starting kicker from last year, entered the transfer portal. He's now at Texas Tech. And Nick Reed, who was his backup, is transferring to New Hampshire. So after Nick Reed's transfer, they had 0 kickers. They've brought in a kicker from Maryland who's got college experience, Jack Howes. And they recently got a commitment from Oliver Houghton, who kicker from the Dallas area. He's ranked as a 5-star recruit by Kohl's Kicking, which one of the things different with kickers, it's not everybody in a pool and they're assigned rankings up by position like other recruiting services do. Kohl's has to personally scout kickers at their camps, at their events, at their showcases as well, too. And that's how rankings are assigned for the kickers. So they've got to do that. They brought in Ethan Stumpf, a punter from East Carolina. Didn't play last year, but he has a lot of upside from what people have talked about. And they've got to get their long snapping depth sewn up as well, too. They moved Andrew Schnackenberg, tight end, to long snapper for spring practices. I don't know if that's going to be a permanent move or not, but there are a lot of holes that need to be filled. They may go after a couple other guys, whether it's a punter, another kicker through the transfer portal, or if there's an incoming freshman as well, too. But I think that's going to be the biggest question mark as far as a depth and bodies go.
Well, Rachel, what does success look like for the Bulls in 2025?
At least 8 wins again, another bowl appearance. It's, the baseline has been set. It's a very high baseline as well. It is definitely, and stay competitive in the MAC. And I think that's really what it is. And it's for those players, those guys with experience, but who haven't been tested at this level, the Taquan Robersons, the Connor Hendersons of the world, to get up to speed quickly and be ready to play once they kick off against Minnesota in August.
Well, is there anything else that you would like to share or think that we need to know about this 2025 Buffalo Bulls football team?
I think we covered everything. Again, they've got a new special teams coordinator also in Chris Monfiletto from Wake Forest as well. Joe Bowen, their defensive coordinator, is back, and linebackers coach as well, too. He's kind of been, I think he's kind of been the straw that stirs the drink to the success of this whole team. As well. And Jordan Johnson, I'm eager to see what he does, with the running backs room, at his hometown school and at his alma mater.
Well, Rachel, thank you for taking some time out of your day to spend with us and share your knowledge. We greatly appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it as well.
If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you all for your support. Until the next time, we are the G55.